Welcome to Chart Chat. It's not chit chat. It's certainly not church chat. SNL would have a problem with that. It is Chart Chat. I am Steve Wexler, founder, principal, and sole employee of Data Revelations, one of the authors of the Big Book of Dashboards, and I am here with my colleagues. Let me introduce you first to the hardest working man in VizBiz. We listened to some R&B. James Brown was known as the hardest working man in showbiz. I think this is the hardest working man in VizBiz, Jeff Shaffer.
Hello, everyone. Jeff Shaffer here. I'm Chief Operating Officer and VP of IT and Analytics at Unifund in Cincinnati, Ohio, and adjunct professor at the University of Cincinnati, where I teach data viz. Great to be here with you all.
And Amanda.
Hi there, I'm Amanda Makulec. I am the Senior Data Visualization Lead at Excella, a tech consulting firm based in Washington, D.C. And I also volunteer as the Operations Director for the Data Visualization Society. Excited to be back with you guys.
I guess it's me next.
I'm guessing it is.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Andy Cotgreave, Evangelist at Tableau. Always a pleasure to be here. And I actually have a question for Jeff. Jeff, you've been introducing yourself in talks like this that I've been part of for years. What does adjunct mean? I've actually never known what that word means.
Adjunct professor, that's basically work like a professor but get paid not like a professor, I guess. No, it's the university supplements their professors that are full-time with people from the business community who come in and teach classes nights and weekends. So
all right.
Nights and weekends, I'm a professor.
Okay.
Wow, I've waited 5 years to know that. Thank you. Back to you, Steve.
Okay, and we can see, and we have one of our colleagues here. One day we need to just have him join us. This is Kevin Flairledge. He's also one of our bouncers. Anyone gets nasty, with text or whatever like this, he will escort you out of this meeting. Let me go back to sharing my screen with you and discuss the agenda, and then pass things over to Andy. So. To be in an actual conference room being bored. We're going to start with a retrospective on a night of election vizzes. Andy was up into the wee hours following the election on November 3rd, which will lead to a discussion of should we assess all visualizations based on precision? Spoiler alert, no. Have a quick lightning round, things that are we find interesting and engaging, and go quickly through it. Discussion, some Q&A from people here, and this has proven to be really popular. A little after party where at the moment we're in a webinar format. Those of us can discuss things, but you can join in on the party. We will post this into the chat in a little bit, but bigpic.me/CC17 after. But before we get into content, a cool thing coming up, and I'll ask Amanda to discuss it.
Absolutely. So we're excited as the Data Visualization Society to announce our first global conference. It's happening in February. It is virtual thanks to COVID, but that makes it also very inclusive to folks from around the world. You're invited, if you are a data viz practitioner in any way, shape, or form, to submit an application to speak. Those are due December 1st. You have the option of speaking in your own native language if you're joining us from another country around the world, and lots of ways that we've worked to try to make that process as inclusive as we can be. We're excited to have a great roster of speakers that's it looks like could be shaping up based on what we're seeing so far. We're also seeking sponsors right now. If you or your company is interested in helping to support the conference, the event, and DVS, feel free to reach out to me. And would love to have you attend and join and buy a ticket. And there are many different pricing options on tickets, so pick what works for you in this current environment. But happy to go ahead and answer any questions, especially at the after party, or feel free to reach out to me directly on Twitter.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing and hand things over to Andy, who will.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Steve. I'm going to assume you can all see my screen. Election viz. I'm not going to talk about politics. I just want to talk about the charts because that's way more fun. So back in December, 2019 in the UK, I stayed up all night to critique the charts that the UK media showed. And I thought, well, hey, let's do it again in November 2020, because yes, over in the US, we all know there is still an ongoing election. So here is my home setup, 4 screens. I could stream about 4 channels simultaneously, just about on my Wi-Fi. And the goal was, using the hashtag ElectionViz, try and generate a conversation around the charts we saw. And it was amazing. And what I want to talk about for the next 3-4 minutes is my key reflection on it. Now, New York Times had this fantastic pun, play on words, about the anchors and how they were chart throbs, right? These guys, yes, that we should recognize they are all middle-aged white men. I think there's a diversity thing we could try and maybe address for future elections or over the coming years. But let's move on from that. They are all excellent, skilled storytellers. They have a command of the data, a command of the technology, and a command of the story and situations to bring the election to life. Great. But when you actually go back to a YouTube rabbit hole and look at all the previous election night coverages, and believe me, it's really good fun to go back. You can go back to the 1960 on YouTube. You kind of realize they've been doing the same thing since 1968. Numbers. But now we have touchscreens and color. And that's, it slightly frustrates me, because I think there's missed opportunities that the networks could be adopting. So I'll show you what I think they could have done instead. And do I think this is the right answer? No. Do I think it's the wrong answer? I don't think it's the wrong answer. But I just want to start a conversation. So do put your opinions in chat and talk about them in the after party. And I'm sure my co-hosts will express opinions in the next few minutes too. So John King, what a hero. Here is his magic wall. And this was a screenshot I took at about midnight my time, maybe 1 a.m. my time. He was talking about Orange County. And this was a typical view. He would zoom in to the map, and then for each county would ask 3 questions. Who's in the lead? Or he would describe these. Who's in the lead? How many votes are counted? And how does this compare to 2016? Can you see that information on this visualization? Not really. I mean, you can, but you can't, right? It's certainly not optimized. What you really can see is the physical shape of Orange County. I don't think that is what's most important when John is telling you the information. So how would I change this? Here is my thinking about a makeover. First of all, I would put the map in the top right, right? Once you've zoomed into Orange County, the actual physical location is secondary information. It's no longer relevant, but it's still there in the top right for context. Secondly, how many votes have been counted? Well, in the top left, in sort of the primacy point of view, stick the number, a progress marker on how many votes have been counted. Now, to be fair, most networks did show this, but it wasn't very prominent. So I just wanted to draw it out a little bit more. Then we can think about the Trump v. Biden progress, or the current number of votes counted, not progress, because it wasn't a race. The votes had already been cast. But this is how they kind of show it. They show it a blue box and a red box, and it's not hard to tell that 64 is bigger than 34.9. But if you actually use the pre-attentive attribute of length to show this, it gets into our brains quicker than John King can point it out, right? So he's got less work to explain the situation. And then that leaves some space on the right conveniently for what I think would be a nice way to show this, the change from 2016 as a slope chart. So here we're using position and slope to convey the change. And, it takes milliseconds, fractions of a second to see that Biden was hugely outperforming Trump in a big swing compared to 2016. And that's my makeover, right? I think what I was trying to do as I thought about this was think, when you zoom into a county, and this applies to any time you're trying to communicate data, what are you trying to do? You've got to think about what you're trying to do and how can you do it as quickly as you can, right? What am I trying to show? How much time will this be on the screen for? There were a bunch of other takeaways from Election Viz as a thing that I did on election night itself. But I was surprised. I was somewhat disappointed at how few charts there actually were on the night. I didn't actually share that many charts because I just didn't see them. They seem to have this continued obsession with numbers, which are frankly hugely important. But I just thought they could go that one extra few steps to really get the information to our brains quicker. And there you go. So that was my thinking. I'm now keen to know, what pushback am I going to get from Steve, Jeff, and Amanda, or agreement? So over to everybody else.
I mean, the one thing.
Go ahead, Amanda.
Steve.
No, please.
So I think the one thing, if you click back to your redesign for a second, Andy, the one, and go back, yeah. So I think it's interesting because I think that it certainly answers a question faster to see the bar, right? To see this kind of bar that shows this. But I'm curious if there's any thought that is given to, do we want to represent that there's some really precise breakout of these two categories at this point in time and kind of make that very apparent when it's really incomplete numbers, right? At the very beginning. And I'm curious, because I remember I was sketching out those slope chart ideas back when we were like all tweeting about election viz. And the question I had too was, are we comparing the share of the votes based on the same amount of vote that has been brought in last year? And then does that represent the same counties? And all of that starts to make all of these comparisons really messy. And so I love this redesign in terms of answering the questions faster, but we're still stuck with a lot of the issues of uncertainty and incomplete data that I think are what really plague a lot of these election viz type visualizations, especially on screens, but also when you're looking at some of the interactives where they have a bit more time and flexibility on how they engage you and explain the complexities behind that information.
I think that's really interesting, Amanda. So a couple of things there. First of all, the slope chart here was inspired by Amanda, who some ungodly hour hand drew a slope chart and shared that on Twitter to sort of show the proof of concept. And I'm always in favor of hand-drawn sketches. So thank you for that, Amanda.
Sure.
I think here's the challenge: as people have seen this and reacted to this, there's interesting challenges. We've got to think that there's obviously more than 3 questions you are going to ask, or John King or Cormackie is going to describe. There's a multitude of questions, and any one of those questions you can answer quicker is good. But then, of course, you find the limitations of which questions you haven't answered. And that's a great process you go through in designing a dashboard or designing a presentation. Is like, well, at some point, we as designers have to make those decisions. So, yes, there's many more questions, and I also think, Amanda, we could push a design like this to incorporate a little bit more while keeping the clarity. There's also an interesting thing I haven't considered too much is that, if we're looking at a news website like the New York Times. Or a business dashboard, we've got a really high granularity. We can put in really fine levels of information, really intricate things. But the actual sort of resolution that you have available for a TV presentation is a lot lower. And I don't have an answer to that, but that's an open question I have about, well, maybe that slightly restricts what you can show and might make some of those answers that we want to add a bit harder to show. That makes sense?
It does. I think to me, it just underscores the fact that there's so many great comments coming in on the chat too about the complexity of the math, right? And who's represented in, what counties are represented in that 80%. And especially in a year where whether you counted your absentee ballots in advance of and leading up to election night versus you started counting them on election night actually made a big difference in kind of what we saw. And I think the nervousness some people felt who were going for Biden on election night, as you didn't really quite internalize from everything we saw, that you were looking at multiple states that hadn't counted many of their absentee ballots yet. So there's the math behind it, I think, is so much more complicated than what these simple charts kind of belay. And it raises the question for me of how do you do that kind of math and those kind of calculations or set yourself up to do them in real time? Could you have like an expert in certain states sitting behind the Steve Kornackis of the world, feeding them the like, here's the key thing that we found as we're doing this deep analysis really, really fast. And so I'm always curious what the team looks like behind the, what did you call them? The chart throbs? They use their hands a lot. They use hands a lot, but behind the chart throbs.
Somebody responded to one of my tweets about this, who designed Cormackie's Magic Wall in 2016. So I need to follow up and see if we can get some information from him. There's some great comments, actually. I noticed somebody mentioned Santiago Ortez's visualization as a vote progress. Now, I haven't seen this before, but I'm guessing this is a scatter plot that is attempting to show the change of the ratio over time, and one flips to another. Now, I have an issue with this whole thing as a British person is kind of crazy because the votes have been cast. So there is no race or change or catching up at all in this election. The votes have been cast. We're just counting the ones we opened in an order we opened. Now, that is the reality of your election process. So I doubt that's going to change. But I find ways to better visualize the race of votes. I have a kind of a like, well, that seems inherently wrong, even though you've been doing it for 50 years in US elections. Steve, you were going to say something.
I'm happy to do so, and then would love to hear from Jeff. I think this is a brilliant redesign of all the questions that they were attempting to answer. It's in a compact amount of space. Seeing the comments that are coming in, there is this, they're trying to create all this drama and, oh, what's going on now? So you could have, show the bar, well, the last time we looked in was 15 minutes ago and 80% of the votes were counted. Now we're up to 90%, and let's see how these changes. And you see the bars move, so you can have the animation of the bars. But with respect to where are we now, how far along, and what's the difference between last time, I think this is a great redesign in a very compact space. And it sounds like, Andy, you're trying to create the greatest degree of understanding with the least amount of effort for the audience. I mean, who would ever want to do something like that?
That's always my mission, Steve.
Yeah.
Always my mission. Create the greatest amount of understanding for the least amount of effort, or by requiring the least amount of effort from the audience. I like it. Yeah, thanks, Steve. Jeff?
I think it's a great redesign. I tweeted out my frustration on election night with at one point one of the hosts was literally calculating things with a calculator and paper. He's got this touch screen in front of him that's doing all this magic, but then they would cut to a commercial break, he'd come back and he's reading numbers off of his piece of paper, with math that he was doing. I don't even remember which news network it was, and it just was apparent to me your visualization isn't giving you the answers you need if you have to do math, going back and forth from the last election to this election to get the number that you're trying to relay to the audience. I think the other thing that I'm maybe missing here that I'd love to see is, that 20% that's left, at some point they call a state, right? They say, okay, there's at some point there's not enough votes for a candidate to win, even if they want them all. And so, seeing some sort of threshold, some shaded area on the bar or the slope graph to show you, what's possible for each one of those candidates. Because, at some point the red team can't get enough votes to catch the blue team, even with the 20% that's remaining. And that's when they call it, right? So I think seeing the variation of year to year and seeing the thresholds of what's left somehow, in a shaded area on top of the bar or in a shaded threshold on the slope graph could be an addition to kind of tell the rest of the story. Yeah,
that's great. I think, well, let's wrap up. I'll just add two things. I think, anybody listening, this kind of exercise is a really good thing to just do as a thought process, right? You take a view you've seen, and then you're thinking, challenge yourself. What is that answering the questions I think they're trying to communicate? And if not, what could you do to change it while balancing that tension of how much granularity have you got? How much time have you got on screen? And, that's why I enjoy doing this kind of thing. The other thing I will show is I don't know how many people might have noticed this little bit of text that was on every single county. And what it's actually showing is some of the really interesting information that you wanted to know. So there in tiny text is Democrats, 24-point swing towards the Democrats since 2016. So it was there for John, but they deliberately designed it so that only John could see it. And I'm like, but that's the information I wanted to see in big text. So it was quite fun one. I think Amanda might have pointed that out to me as well. All right. Well, I'll get back to reading the comments that you've all put. Thanks for I can see there's lots of conversation on Chatter about that. And I'll pass it back to Steve.
So, Andy, you were saying that you were, disappointed by, they're just showing numbers. There's been no change, creativity, innovation from 50, 60 years ago. And I do want to share some people who have kind of piped in with some innovative new charts. This first thing comes from Adam McCann. It's one of our friends and colleagues. He does brilliant work. He was inspired by, I think, Kevin Flaherty to look at the odds of Trump winning over time. You know, that over time it looked like, oh, Trump's going to win, and then Vegas was having odds and England was having odds on this. And he developed both the tie gauge, not a pi gauge, but the tie gauge and the frownometer. And let me share that with you here. You see how these things are progressing. And,
I did not realize the tie was animating on that. Oh, Adam, that's so good.
Yeah, he has so there's a lot going on here. The eyebrows are moving, the tie is moving, the mouth is moving. There's a lot of work going on here to make this happen. This is someone who I know does not have a lot of free time. He's behaving like he does have an awful lot of free time. All right, so that you can look at duelingdata.blogspot.com. Adam, great work from Adam. This comes from Ken Flaherty, one of the Flaherty twins, and I think he claims he was inspired by Chart Chat and by work by his brother Kevin, and all the difficulties in trying to visualize electoral data on a map. And he came up with, this wonderful interactive dashboard where you can explore these different things. He asked me to do running commentary on these things. So, this was my favorite on it. But if you, kind of look at want to get the commentary on and thoughts on it, you can there. What I liked about this was that he tagged me and gave me credit in this. So I'm getting, all this stuff is flooding my Twitter feed, and I'm getting credit for something that I really didn't do much work on. And I'm sure Andy and Jeff are going, oh, kind of reminds me of the big book of dashboards. But
yeah.
So I'll leave it as an exercise for the viewer to go to flahertytwins.com. But this is my favorite, is called the Gridded Cartogram. I had always thought this was a hexagram, but according to Ken Field, it is called the Gridded Cartogram, and it really sounds like the official names that you give to birds in the wild. Look, it's a ruby-throated gridded cartogram. This was my favorite. I think this ended up being Ken's favorite, which is the bubble tile map. Well, it was his favorite up until yesterday, and he has come up with, I think, is truly the one of the most innovative ways I've seen to try to convey electoral information. He came up with what I guess would be called the chipped cartogram, and so here's a view of it here. He is using poker chips, and here are various different views trying to impart. Those of you who are looking at Maine and Nebraska very carefully will see there is in fact blue chips that are blue chip that is interspersed with the red chips, because those are two states that are not winner take all. I am looking forward to when the cat jumps on the table and knocks everything over. It's just a matter of time, Ken.
I absolutely love this. Just move forward one slide, right? In my it's just so good, right? This is clearly wonderful, but then I just always find it fun being the date of his police and being like, oh yes, well now I can't see Washington or Oregon because California is obscuring the state. And then he's like, oh Andy, don't even, why are you even thinking that, right? It's not the point. But at which point I think that's a good time to segue, right? Into the next section.
Yes, it is. So I'll stop sharing and we can go to the
transparent. Yeah, Kevin says add some transparency to the poker chip.
Yeah. Can we change the do we have an opacity control on the poker chips?
So Steve, is that over to me to chat a little bit about the paper that we had pulled up and read about?
Yes.
So we went ahead and we were talking about all these themes around the election visualization and also about kind of some of the broader themes of functionally kind of 2020, right? We're looking at a lot of information and visualizations that are often of incomplete and uncertain data. And we've seen a lot of very creative visualizations like the chipped cartogram. And there was a paper that came out from IEEE that actually focused on this question around why do we focus so much on precision and speed to information when we're teaching or evaluating data visualizations? Because if you sat through an introductory workshop on data viz and charts and graphs, you've probably talked through the kind of relative ease with which we understand and visually compare different kinds of marks in space, whether it's kind of the bars and the lines and using length, or it's things like hue or saturation. And in the paper, which was written by a team of 3 co-authors, I'll go ahead and throw the link into the chat box as well, called Beyond Precision-Driven Visualization, they opened up and they actually had opened up with an image that was quite striking that has the Menard map recreated in Tableau with something that approximates what the Menard map looked like, and then actually plotting it with dots in space, which in theory are more precise, which should in theory give us faster speed to information. And they point out in their paper that on one hand, all of the exemplars we often speak about of good visualizations can be really diverse and complex and reward contemplation. These are 3 examples who were winners at the Information is Beautiful Awards last year. So a big industry standard award typically rewards really creative, innovative visualizations that take a long time to interact with and understand. They reward contemplation. And that's what we've kind of allowed one of those industry awards to really kind of recognize in terms of the things we say are great and good about data visualization. We've seen that also in things like the Iron Viz competition and the kinds of different stories and storytelling and visual motifs that really rise to the top for the Iron Viz feeders and in the Iron Viz competition itself. But then on the other hand, our foundational kind of empirical results and rules of thumb are often simple and minimalistic. These are the things we're teaching and are taught as we're learning how to do good chart and graph design. And these are all examples from the big book of dashboards written by these 3 other guys, talking about how to go ahead and maximize speed to information and helping people see those patterns clearly and quickly. And so I think it's an interesting question as we think about kind of how we teach visualization, how we assess visualizations, and then what we actually build and what we engage with and are excited by. And so these rules, when we think about all the different rules we have, we typically evaluate success of a visualization by how quickly and accurately people extract specific information from charts, specifically in research, when folks are doing user research around which visualizations work the best. And what was interesting about this paper is they proposed that maybe that's really not the only criteria we should use, to which I said, as a person who practices and designs and works with clients to build visualizations, well, of course. There are so many other things we consider besides precision and speed to information about who the audience is and what their needs are, what their questions are, what mental models they have. And it made me think about, because I know many of you know I have a public health background, and I can't get away from the fact that we're in our 3rd wave of COVID right now, thinking about different ways that information about COVID and all these charts and graphs and trackers have been presented in different formats. And this is an example from about 2 miles down to the street from my house in DC, where someone, an artist, actually planted an individual flag for each of the COVID-related deaths that's been quantified here in the US. And each flag represents 1 life lost. People can write names and in memorial on it. And when you look at it from up above, you can actually stare down the street to the Capitol. You see that here in this photo, it actually fills most of the center of this entire kind of park outside the DC Armory. And over time, there were flags that also filled those green spaces off to the left and the right. And at the very, very front, there's a big number. So she's got 1 band, like 1 big ass number at the very front that gets updated daily. This is obviously out of date at this point. And she was iteratively adding all these flags in. So this number didn't match the number of flags. And for a while, it was off by tens of thousands of flags. But the question that I would ask is it a bad visualization in the sense of assessing precision because the number and the flag count don't precisely match? And I would argue that it really isn't, because it makes you feel something and it makes you understand context. And as the authors of this paper talked about, it allows you to kind of look beyond the individual values represented to see the big picture. That was one of the 3 things they talked about considering as we think about other ways to assess a visualization. Second, thinking about the role of metaphors and expressiveness and how we engage with the information and what kind of visual metaphors we use in our visualizations. I think the poker chips are a really funny and interesting one in some ways around the kind of roll the dice analogy and thinking about the ways in which we were watching those election results. And thinking about how we design to persuade, educate, and motivate, which isn't always about precision and fastest speed to information. So talking to the three authors from the Big Book of Dashboards, one of whom just talked about how much he loved the chipped cartogram, I'm very curious what your thoughts are on how we think about and expand our definition of what makes a really good data visualization and why it is that a paper like this has to be written to help us all recognize that.
Woo, deep stuff.
Yeah. Go, Jeff, you started.
I'll jump in because I teach it, right? I'm telling my students all the time that that's what they do. I guess for me, where I reconcile all of this is at the start, I always say, who's your audience? What's your message, right? And the audience, depending on who that audience is and what message or what information you're trying to relay, that answers that question for me. I live mostly in the business world, and in the business world, I don't have the luxury of the time that it would take to code Nadia Bremer beautiful visualization. And I certainly wouldn't bring it in a conference room and put it up on a projector and say, hey, this is how our sales are doing, right? They want quick information. They want accurate information. They want precision quickly. And so I get that, the authors of those original foundational papers, focused a lot on that. Let me just share my screen really quickly here and just kind of amplify some of the things that you were talking about. I have no idea which screen you're seeing here. Can you see this tweet?
Yes.
So Santiago Ortiz tweeted out, doing graphs that are easy to read is a noble pursuit. It's not mine. I expect effort and I aim for a reward for that effort, seeing things differently and seeing things better. So clearly he's, saying, I don't live in that camp, right? We often say the greatest degree of understanding with the least amount of effort. That's what at least the Big Book of Dashboards authors have been spouting out in workshops and online. There are people who design differently for different purposes. And, here's Nadia, who I'm a big fan of both of their work. This is exactly how I feel and what I also strive for in my visualizations. I have a quote, and I thought it'd be fun to drop this on my three participants here. It's from a paper. We do not argue that this accuracy of quantitative extraction is the only aspect of a graph for which one might want to develop a theory, but it is an important one. Any of you have a guess of who wrote that?
Is it like a Cleveland and McGill?
Exactly. The guys who wrote the paper on the pre-attentive attribute that we all reference and talk about time to encode information and accuracy of encoding information. So going back to the original paper that they wrote in 1984 that everybody does research on top of that and focuses on speed and accuracy, they state right in the opening of their paper that this isn't the only way, to look at this, and they acknowledge that it's an important one. By the way, they also say these aren't rules; these are guidelines and a way of thinking. So, they're not setting it down into stone and say future research is required. But I thought that was interesting that the foundational research of our industry that we all point to, they say right off the bat that this isn't the only way to look at it. So. I guess that was my interesting take, and I thought I would just maybe finish by showing these two visualizations. These are both Viz of the Day by Tableau in the last week, and this one by Sam Parsons. I mean, it's beautiful. It is a gorgeous piece of art. He threw down his Tableau chops right there. Like, there's no doubt that. He's now saying, look what I can do, right? Like, you can build that in Tableau. That's super, super impressive. But then I go to sit and read it and understand it. This takes a lot of time. I didn't understand at first what this was. I had to dive into this, and I probably spent 15 or 20 minutes with this Viz in total which may have been his goal, right? It's back to what Santiago said. You expect effort, and hopefully there's a reward for that effort. Then let me counter that to something that won Viz of the Day just a few days earlier. This is a gorgeous visualization. I love this. I love the way that the color is used. I love the grid design. I love the font. And I love the way that we took complexity and drilled it down to say, hey, who am I? I'm the United States. Let me see the United States. And I click on the United States after I wait for Tableau Public to refresh. I'll click on the United States, and now I can see my country and how I'm comparing to the rest. And so here's two completely different examples within a week that I saw, and they both speak to me in different ways. This is how I'm designing my business dashboard, trying to aspire to something like this. But that's not to take away from this technical masterpiece over here that I'm not going to get the same information from. Those are my thoughts.
Andy, do you want to go? Can't hear you, Andy.
Like a professional, kept on mute. A couple of things I'd add. I think that the Menard chart is just such an example that keeps on giving, because also I think there's something about how much your audience is going to give you in terms of time, right? You know, Menard made that chart at a time that he would expect people to sit down and dwell over a chart and give it a bunch of time. Now, over time, you know, these days, do we expect that in a social media driven world? You know, sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. So I think what the audience is willing to give you plays into some of these decisions. I was really lucky to interview Ash and Lena from ProPublica earlier this year about their COVID tracking, their COVID tracker on ProPublica's site, and it has an animated sort of swing weather vane for each state at the top. It's a kind of hex map of weather vanes that swing up or down according to the COVID trend in that state. And then down below, they've got detailed charts that require and demand effort to get the insight out of. And they were like, well, they said they made a very deliberate decision. Some people are only going to give us 3 seconds. So you give them an animated chart, which gives them a gist. Some people are going to give the time to get all the data from. And so they provided both. You know, one is the grabby or quick social media part of it, and the other is the detailed data story for those who need it. I really like that approach. Obviously, it's a lot harder work to do both, but I think it sits on both sides of the spectrum, or both sides of the argument. So that was a good one.
I've been trying to resolve this for at least 5 or 6 years. I wrote a blog post, emotional versus accurate comparisons, which kind of got beat up a little bit by Stephen Few, but that's okay. And well, when are you striving for accuracy and when is feeling more important? And it all goes back to your audience and what you're trying to impart and what do they need. So my biggest problem with people showing the Menard chart and the Florence Nightingale wedge/rose chart and being held up, look at these amazing things. This is considered maybe the greatest statistical chart ever drawn. And here's this other chart and it changed the British healthcare system. And you're forgetting both of these people who created their charts really knew their audience as well and the expectations. Case of Menard, well-to-do, well-educated, sitting in a drawing room with ruler in hand so that you could take, compare the size legend and bring it over here. I can't imagine any busy executive looking at the Nightingale Rose chart and going, oh, this is fascinating. Let me get my protractor and take a look at this right now. But at the same time, here I am touting, how great bars are for accurate comparisons. Showed this case study from Greg Lewandowski, which in fact, it was 25,000 dots, and only 9 of the dots were shaded to indicate 25% of our income is coming from 9 out of these 25,000 dots, and it was very powerful stuff. And why did that work? Well, you didn't need to make an accurate comparison. You didn't need to see that this is exactly 16,418 times as big as this other thing. It was just trying to get across, look at what this is doing. Now, interestingly, he started with, bar charts and said, yeah, but what is what is the reaction, the feeling that I want to get? So he started with that to get understanding, and then as part of the storytelling, he went with something else. So I wish there were a hard and fast rule, but if you are always thinking about what is going to best help your audience, it will probably drive you to make good decisions.
Fair. Why do you think that we focus on teaching the precision-based rules, Jeff? I know you're a professor. I know I teach workshops too and different things. And I think we talk about those a lot. Is this a kind of learn the rules and what the practices are so that you can break them?
I mean, that may be part of it. I think again, my world, I teach in the business college, right? So I teach people who are masters in business analytics and information systems that are going to go to companies, big companies, and make business dashboards, right? The business visualizations. So I'm not in a realm where people are going to leave and, make data art or even infographics in that case. So I think that's, for me, that's part of it. And again, in my day-to-day and my company, it's more of the same thing. It's time to insight, right? For me, the beauty of a tool like Tableau is I can iterate quickly. As Steve likes to say, you can fail fast, right? You can say, oh, that doesn't work. Let's try this. Let's try this. And you can't really do that in a coding language. And so a tool like Tableau lets me iterate fast. I want to get accurate comparisons quickly and then put them together into something that will give that quick insight to ultimately the business to drive the decision. I don't think I'm going to get a user who's going to devote the 10 minutes to decipher a masterpiece like Sam's Viz.
I think there's some really good comments in the chat right now. One of which I think is focusing on kind of the things we do in our day-to-day work. Like Sam, someone noted that Sam builds business dashboards in his day-to-day work. So outside of work, you build something fun that lets you kind of stretch your technical chops. And I think that when you stretch things that way and like find different ways to use math, I know the Fleur-Lage twins are like the masters of using complex mathematics to place and create visualizations, I feel like. But looking at how you do those things in a fun environment can sometimes help you find more sophisticated, more eloquent ways of creating some of those same kind of features, even if it's not as artistic, in the other side. So I think that they kind of come part and parcel together, that you can go ahead and you can learn from one and apply those same skills in another environment. I don't think they're totally separate on the Venn diagram space.
By the way, I want to give a shout out to one of my favorite practitioners, and that's Roddy Zakovich. That he can out-curvy anybody, but I will never see him, hey, let me show off, what I can do for the sake of, showing off. He'll usually choose, hey, I'm doing this because it makes sense to do this. By the way, I have data as art. I would gladly frame and print the Sam Parsons thing, and it would make a wonderful addition to this room. It just realized, I think that's what it's striving for. Enjoy this, get lost into it, the wonderful curves, the swirls, etc. But the best amongst us, I'm seeing them, and way more chops than I have. They're able to do these beautiful design things, and at the same time, they don't compromise the analytic integrity. When I see stuff like that, I just get blown away. Oh my God, that thing is just gorgeous and well designed, and I want to spend time in it. And look how clear it's helping me understand this business issue, which is the area that I play in. If you're calling me up to do an infographic, it means like 50 other people must have hepatitis. I'm the wrong guy to be assisting you with this. So my 2 cents.
I would add, not just for fun, people doing this, you're exactly right. Everybody's at work doing business dashboards and they use Tableau Public as sort of an arena. But the other thing is that it does show your technical chops. There is no doubt, looking at that viz, that Sam could probably build anything I'm going to ask for him in a business environment. Yeah. And so he just, I shouldn't be saying this to Sam's employer, but I hope you're paying the guy well, because, that guy could be doing Tableau anywhere, right? So, bravo to him.
Yeah, I think you asked a moment ago, Amanda, why do we teach the rules and rules and the foundations? And I think we have to teach the rules. Those fundamentals are absolutely vital. I know Steve and Jeff are accomplished musicians. I don't know if you play musical instruments, Amanda. It wouldn't surprise me if you did, right?
Well,
But
12 years of piano.
All right.
I'd call myself rusty at this point, though.
Okay, well, all right. I'm 6 months into learning the piano. It's great. But you could not be an accomplished jazz musician if you did not know the foundations of how an instrument works and music theory, right? It's by learning those rules and those guidelines, you can then know how to break them and still make a coherent sound, right? And the same is fundamentally true of data visualization. So I think, we lean towards business anyway, because that's where most people learn this stuff, but you can't go and be creative until you appreciate those fundamentals. I'll also say, you know, from a Tableau perspective, one of the challenges we have with Viz of the Day, where we share, you know, one great visualization every day, is we have a challenge in some people do this as a hobby outside their time and go down this creative path, and sometimes we share business dashboards. So Jeff showed both of those. The challenge we have as a brand and as a company is how do people who are just learning about Tableau and data visualization, how are they supposed to interpret Viz of the Day? Because we're putting all these things on a pedestal, and they are all fantastic for the specific reasons each one is fantastic. But that doesn't mean that me as a business dashboard developer should look at SAMs and think that is fantastic for this business use case. Mm-hmm. We haven't solved that. We acknowledge that's a challenge, you know, and it creates a few conversations here and there, let's say. But yeah, we love sharing. We love the opportunity to share what people do in Viz of the Day, you know, and there is a space for everything. Our job is to educate people about which is appropriate and which in which particular circumstance.
I think it's a curious question of what people take away from it as data visualization practitioners and thinking about the way that our field and our community has grown. But then also, what do clients take away from that? If someone's investing in a new BI tool and what they go and they look at, and I'm actually saying this in a positive way, it sells Tableau really, really well, because they're like, well, these are beautiful. And if they're not accustomed to looking at their data in different visual formats a lot, they're like, these are beautiful and elegant and all these different wonderful features and things that you could do with it. And when you move that into an enterprise environment with all the challenges and constraints of data volume and rendering size and performance and how things actually scale as you refresh data, instead of using fixed size data sets that you can pad in with additional reference cells and numbers and parameters and things, it creates a totally misguided set of expectations. And I've seen this in person with clients around kind of, why aren't the dashboards we're looking at these beautiful scrolly telling pieces with all this explanatory text? Can't you automate that? And I have to say, no, like that's all text that someone has written and taken and crafted and put in there as a story. Yep. It's not, and there's certainly pieces of text you can automate in Tableau. I'm not saying you can't, but it's not going to read out for you what your business should do. Our job is to provide you with information that you can start to use with your context and inform your decision-making. And again, to your point, faster speed to information. And so I think that there's also the client constraint, Andy.
And scale and performance is another one just to talk about is go use Sam's Viz for 5 minutes and see how you like it. I mean, he's got all these extra points to create those curvy lines, which is what we have to do in Tableau. And so adding 50,000 extra points to a Viz is not going to make it performance. So then you're back to, you know, client expectations, right? It'll look beautiful in a static image, but somebody's going to get frustrated really quickly as they try to dive down into something.
And Jeff, you and I have, you know, a shared client that suffers from Sankeitis. And what happens and want to try to do these things, et cetera. By the way, I think a lot of these things would go away if Tableau just had a curvy line feature. Just make it, you know, give me an option to make stuff curvy, and people would stop doing.
Do you not remember? You know, if you go back 20 years, when I started using Excel for data visualization, you know, curvy lines were the thing. And then as I became, you know, was a convert to the Stephen Few view of the world and learning about the fundamentals about 15 years ago, and it's like, no, curves on a timeline are really wrong because they suggest an incorrect interpretation of the path. And I was like, okay, I believe Stephen Few, so that must be true. And obviously that was then what Tableau adopted, and that was the way we went. But as I got more mature in this, I was like, well, surely a line chart infers a fake trend anyway, right? You know,
it exactly does.
The straight line is just
going between January and February.
Right. So I eventually woke up going, well, so why not give me a curvy line? It's just as pretty, or it's more pretty, and it's it's still just as potentially fictional. So yeah, maybe if we'd have softened on that opinion, we could have had curvy lines in Tableau from day one, but we didn't.
So you're saying blame Stephen Few for not having curvy lines in Tableau? Is that the key takeaway from today, Andy?
I'm what? Sorry.
Great setup,
Audio's
Amanda.
going on.
Great
Sorry,
setup.
sorry, can't hear you. Sorry. Shannon says add the sigmoid. Yes, I think adding a sigmoid, it'd be nice.
I'd love to see actually beyond that, because the sigmoid is only going to solve, that would, by the way, the sigmoid function was just something I came up with to create a curvy line. There's so many other functions to do that you could use. But I'd love to be able to just put in functions, like just put a function in and just write a function from point A to point B would be great. And yeah, maybe that'll be coming in the future.
I'll pass it on to the decision makers.
Yes, and that's the end of the first Indiana Jones movie. Who's looking into this? Oh, we have our top people. Top people are investigating this. Top people.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
So as we're kind of wrapping up and kind of thinking about kind of themes and how these all tie together, Andy, a lot of our favorite visualizations of all those election visualizations weren't really the most precise ones. I keep thinking back to those Voronoi charts you could play with and drop balls into. And
that's what we talked about last time in chart chat, right? Isn't it? It's accuracy isn't everything.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, we can move to opening some stuff to Q&A here and answering some of the questions that have come in, or we can, possibly discuss your little bombshell on Nightingale and William Farr. Do you want to do that, Andy? I can cue it up. Or do we save that for another day?
No, let's do it now.
All right. Give me a second and let me get a.
Well, actually, I can share my screen.
Okay, but I have the I have
You're
the
going to play the video
sound effect already for you.
Oh, do you want to play that? You want to play the video?
No. You go ahead and take it away, Andy.
So I just wonder. I don't know how many data viz history nerds we have with us on this today, but has anybody just type yes or no? Has anybody heard this quote from William Farr? This was what he wrote to Florence Nightingale when she was making the rose diagrams. And I've used this slide many times because it was the fight of the man against the pioneering woman who was fighting the system. Yes. Right. So I'm seeing a bit of yeses, right? This slide has given me much joy over the years because I can say, oh, William Farr, what did he know? You complain that your chart would be dry. The drier, the better. Statistics should be the driest of all reading. And Florence Nightingale was arguing, no, I'm going to put rose diagrams in my report and I'm going to use data visualization to change the world. Guess what? It turned out that William Farr did not write this to Florence Nightingale. It turned out that Florence Nightingale wrote this to William Farr. And I am devastated to hear that that is true. But if I just stop my screen sharing, Tim Harford's new book is exceptionally good. It's coming out in the US in February. He did some research to try and find that original letter, and he ended up in the British Library and found it was Florence Nightingale who wrote it to William Farr, and thus devastating my slide decks, and it's a bombshell. I'm still not recovered. Yes, wait, what, says Sean Miller. Exactly.
Hold on one sec.
So,
and I got to get this queued up just right here. All right, here we go. So, the way I found out about this was Ken Field posted this a few days ago, and it was a video by these two fellows called the Map Men, and it's sharing the incredible story of Jon Snow determining that it was in fact tainted water, not tainted air, that was responsible for the cholera outbreak in London in 1854. Notice he says, well, they took some artistic license here. Well, what artistic license? And I love this counter tweet from R.J. Andrews. It's annoying how everyone perpetuates the wrong sequence of events with the story. The correct sequence is that eventually a map got created, and then the way we always relate it, the way we see it in the movies, literally. Outbreak, Jon Snow gathers data, creates a map, postulates a theory that results in the Broad Street pump handle being removed. And we want that second one because data visualization is part of the heroics. I ended up amplifying this and, just retweeting it and going, oh, yeah, kind of good point. And then Andy piped in with this. And I thought, oh my gosh, if you're going to have a bombshell like that, you really need to deliver it. So here we go. That's my point. So the this is in the same way that the COVID and the unemployment claims ended up breaking a whole lot of charts. Anyone who's done history of data visualization decks, this little finding, if it proves to be correct, is going to break a whole bunch of slide decks.
Yeah, sorry. If you go to that tweet now, I did add evidence, as Steve warned me he was going to, give me a hard time.
No, you were fine with it, and I ended up, I've now purchased the book, which apparently I can get in the United States, just not that quickly. So I'm looking forward to reading it. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, now I'm worried about what else is in that book that's going to debunk something I thought was true.
I will jump in with a quick lightning round. People were asking. So I'm going to do a shout out to Makeover Monday. This last data set last week was Nintendo sales, and really cool stuff. I thought what people did, bringing design in with the colors and still building some great visualizations. There was a wonderful roundup on this one. So if you're not familiar with the project, definitely check it out. Ava Murray and Charlie Hutchinson have been hosting it and doing a great job on that. And there was some really cool visualizations, great analytical work, yet really good design. So shout out to them on that.
Yeah, that one in the top left is gorgeous.
I particularly liked the one with made like the switch with the colors from the switch. Yeah,
really nice.
Hold on though. Anytime there's a highlight table and there's a marginal histogram, so I just love that.
I knew you. I thought I knew you type in there because I know that is your favorite chart type.
Yeah, it's like and it's just.
All right. Well, with that.
All right. So, folks, hold on. Let me just do a little, added pitching of stuff. Let me share my screen. Let people know where they can join afterwards. In the unlikely event you get asked for a password on this, it is CC17, or is it no? I think that's the password, but it should be embedded in that link that you see there. Let's see what else. Workshops, recordings of Chart Chat you can find at bigbookofdashboards.com, and of course a link to where you can buy the book. I have a workshop, public workshop coming up December 8th and 10th. You can find out about that at bigbookofdashboards.com. Or at Data Revelations, my website, and there is the link to it right there. Let's see, is there anything else? Well, we're going to move this over to the after party. So thank you, Amanda, for including that link there. I've got to close this meeting, open that meeting, and hope to see a bunch of you there, and hope to see some of you at the workshop on December 8th and 10th. Thanks so much. Who can't join us, the recording will be, easy for me to say. Jeff has to do all the work on this one. The recording should be available in a few days. And
somebody did ask about the next Chart Chat.
Oh, yes.
Didn't we?
We are going to go ahead and skip December with all the holiday fervor, even if holidays are mainly at home this year. But we are planning on being back in January. What was the date we picked up, Steve?
January 28th, and hold on, I know we have a link for it someplace. It's
while you're finding that link, I unfortunately cannot make the after party. I have a whole family that's isolating because of the COVID. None of them have it, but we got to stay at home, so I got to go and manage that.
Hold on.
And I will try to carry the mantle for you, Andy, who has been our wonderful after party host over the last couple months. So I hope you'll still choose to join us, even if Mr. Cotgreave is not going to be there.
You'll be
Hold on,
amazing,
I've
Amanda.
I've got the link. And sorry I did not include that.
There we go.
And we'll reshare that link at the after party if you're joining us. So we'll throw that link also in the Zoom chat at the after party too.
Okay, see you folks shortly.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you all.